The morning sun barely pierced through the heavy clouds hanging over Fort Harrison as Colonel Marcus Webb stood at the back of the base auditorium, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. The quarterly town hall meeting had descended into chaos. Soldiers shouted over each other, families complained about housing conditions, and the base commander's attempts to restore order fell on deaf ears. Webb's fists balled at his sides. 42 years old, decorated for valor in 3 combat zones, and now reduced to watching discipline crumble like sand through fingers. His uniform bore the weight of his achievements, but in this moment, those ribbons felt like hollow decorations on a failing structure. "This is unacceptable," he muttered to the captain beside him. Unacceptable. The auditorium smelled of stale coffee and frustration. 200 people packed into seats designed for comfort, but offering none today. Webb had organized this meeting to address concerns, to show transparency. Instead, it had become a spectacle of disorder. He strode down the center aisle, his boots echoing against the tile floor. The sound should have commanded attention. It didn't. A sergeant near the front was arguing with a major about equipment shortages. 3 rows back, a spouse stood waving a fistful of papers about unpaid benefits. Webb reached the stage and grabbed the microphone from the startled base commander. The feedback screech finally silenced some of the crowd. "Enough!" His voice carried the authority of 2 decades of command. "You will sit down, you will be quiet, and you will remember where you are." The auditorium fell into an uneasy quiet, but Webb could feel the resentment radiating from the assembled crowd, like heat from asphalt. They weren't afraid of him, they were angry. And worse, they were right to be. "I understand your frustrations," Webb continued, forcing his voice to soften slightly. "But this chaos helps no one. We need order. We need someone who remembers what leadership looks like." The voice came from the back, quiet, steady. It carried through the auditorium, not through volume, but through something else. Weight, maybe, or certainty. Webb squinted against the stage lights, trying to identify the speaker. Movement near the entrance caught his eye. An old man stood slowly, his weathered hands gripping the seat in front of him for support. The man had to be 75, maybe older. His clothes were civilian, simple, a flannel shirt tucked into jeans that had seen better decades. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, sun damage, and time, but his eyes, even from this distance, were sharp as broken glass. "And who the hell are you?" Webb demanded, his patience finally snapping. "This is a military installation. If you're not authorized personnel or family, you need to leave." The old man started walking down the aisle. His gait was slow, hindered by what looked like an old injury to his left leg. Each step seemed deliberate, measured, as if he was counting them. "I'm authorized," the man said quietly. "Been authorized here longer than you've been alive, son." Webb felt his face flush. "I don't care if you've been coming here since Eisenhower. You don't interrupt a commanding officer. Security, escort this man out." 2 young MPs moved toward the old man, but something made them hesitate. Maybe it was the way he carried himself despite the limp. Maybe it was the sudden change in the room's energy. The crowd had gone from angry to intensely curious. "You want order?" the old man asked, still walking. "You want discipline? You stand up there demanding respect while showing none yourself. That's not leadership, Colonel. That's just noise." Webb's hand trembled slightly on the microphone. "I don't know who you think you are, but Sergeant Major William Cross, retired." The old man reached the front row and stopped, looking up at Webb with those cutting eyes. "And I think you should sit down, Colonel, before you embarrass yourself more than you already have." The auditorium erupted in murmurs. Webb felt control slipping further from his grasp. A retired sergeant major? That meant nothing. This was his base, his meeting, his command. "Security, I said, remove him. Now." The MPs looked at each other, then at Sergeant Major Cross, then back at Webb. Neither moved. "Do it!" Webb shouted. Cross climbed the stage steps slowly, each one an effort. But he made it. Standing now on the same platform as Webb, the old man seemed to grow larger, or maybe Webb felt himself shrinking. "You've lost control, son," Cross said, his voice still quiet but somehow filling every corner of that auditorium, not just of this meeting, of yourself, of what command actually means. Webb's hand shot out, finger pointing at Cross's face. "You have no authority here. You have no right to—" "I have every right," Cross interrupted. "This base was built on the backs of men who understood sacrifice, who understood that command isn't about control, it's about service." Webb's vision tunneled. The crowd, the lights, the stage, it all compressed to just this moment. This old man challenging everything Webb had built his career on. "Get off my stage," Webb said through gritted teeth. "Make me," Cross replied simply. The words hung in the air like a dare. Webb felt his control snap completely. He reached out to physically push Cross away, but the old man's hand, lightning fast despite his age, caught Webb's wrist in a grip like iron. For just a second, Webb saw something in Cross's eyes. Not anger, not triumph, just a deep, profound sadness. Then Cross released him, stepped back, and turned to face the crowd. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. 200 people held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Colonel Webb stood frozen, his wrist still tingling from that impossible grip, his authority evaporating like morning dew. Sergeant Major William Cross looked out at the assembled soldiers and families. His posture straightened despite the years, despite the injury that made him limp. In that moment, he didn't look like a 70-something civilian. He looked like what he had been, what he still was, somewhere deep inside. "Most of you don't know me," Cross began, his voice carrying easily without needing a microphone. "That's fine. That's how it should be. Men like me did our job and faded away. But I know this base. I know what it stands for, and I can't stand here and watch it tear itself apart." Webb found his voice. "This is completely out of line. You can't just—" 27 years I served, Cross continued, not looking at Webb. "Started as a private with more fear than sense. Ended as a sergeant major who'd seen more combat than he could count. 53 confirmed rescues under fire. Lost count of the unconfirmed ones. Lost track of a lot of things, actually." A woman in the third row leaned forward. She was older, maybe 60, with the bearing of a military spouse who'd weathered decades of deployments. "Cross?" she said hesitantly. "William Cross?" The old man's eyes found her. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. "Martha Hendricks. Been a long time." "Oh my God," she breathed. "It is you. We all thought you were dead." Webb's confusion mixed with his anger. Someone explain what's happening here. But no one was listening to him anymore. The shift in the room's attention was complete. All eyes were on Cross. A major near the front stood up. He was in his 50s, career officer, ribbons indicating service in Iraq and Afghanistan. "Sergeant Major Cross, the one from Coast Province, 2003. Cross's jaw tightened slightly. "I was there, yes." "You saved my entire platoon," the major said, his voice cracking. "I was a lieutenant, green as grass. We got pinned down in that valley. Command had written us off, but you came anyway, you and 4 others, walked through hell to pull us out." Webb felt the ground shifting beneath him. Around the auditorium, more people were standing, some older, some younger, all staring at Cross with recognition, with something that looked like awe. "I remember you," a sergeant said from the middle section. "You were the instructor at Basic, Fort Benning, 1998. You pulled me aside after I failed my rifle qualification the 3rd time. Told me I was thinking too much, feeling too little. Spent 3 hours with me until I got it right. I wouldn't have made it without you." Cross shook his head slightly. "You made it because you wanted to. I just showed you how." Camp Pendleton, another voice called out. You were there when the barracks fire happened, 2005. You ran in when everyone else ran out, saved 6 Marines, got third-degree burns doing it. Webb looked at Cross with new eyes. The old flannel shirt covered what must be significant scarring. The limp wasn't just an old injury, it was a Medal of Honor written in damaged tissue and bone. This is all very touching, Webb said, trying to regain some semblance of control. But it doesn't change the fact that you've lost their respect. Cross turned to face him fully. No, it doesn't change that. Nothing I say will change that, Colonel. Only you can change that. Webb felt something inside him crack. I've served this country for 20 years. You've earned nothing, Cross said quietly. Rank is earned, respect is earned, command is earned. Every single day, every single interaction, you don't get to stand on past victories and demand people follow you. That's not how leadership works. The old man took a step closer. His voice dropped low enough that only Webb could hear. I know what you're feeling right now. That desperate need to reassert control, to prove you're still in charge. I felt it too, many times. The difference is, I learned to let it go, to serve instead of command, to listen instead of order. Webb's hands trembled. You don't understand. If I lose control here, if I show weakness, you already showed weakness, Cross said gently. The moment you shouted at them instead of hearing them, the moment you tried to have me removed instead of asking why I stood up. The moment you put your need to be right above their need to be heard. Something in Webb's chest felt like it was collapsing. He looked out at the crowd, at the faces that had been so angry moments ago. Now they just looked tired and disappointed. I don't know how to fix this, Webb admitted quietly. Start by stepping aside, Cross said. Let me talk to them. Not as someone with authority, just as someone who remembers what it was like to be where they are. To be scared, frustrated, feeling unheard. Then you listen, really listen. And tomorrow, you start earning back what you lost today. Webb looked at the old sergeant major, at the scars visible on his hands, at the limp that spoke of pain carried daily without complaint, at the eyes that had seen horrors and somehow retained kindness. Slowly, Colonel Marcus Webb stepped back from the center of the stage. Cross moved forward, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of all those years, all those sacrifices, all those lives saved and lives lost. Let me tell you about a young colonel I once knew, he began. Brilliant tactician, brave as they come. But he made a mistake. Got 20 good men killed because he was so focused on the mission, he forgot about the people executing it. I was one of the survivors. And you know what that colonel did? The auditorium was silent. He stood in front of us, took off his rank insignia, and said he would understand if we couldn't follow him anymore. He didn't make excuses, didn't try to justify it, just owned it completely. And then he asked us what he could do better. That colonel went on to become a general, not because he was perfect, but because he was willing to be imperfect and learn from it. Cross turned to look at Webb. Today, Colonel Webb made mistakes. But standing here now, letting me speak instead of having me dragged out, that takes more courage than anything else he could have done. So, before we address your concerns, I want you to know something. Your colonel, he's still learning, just like all of us are still learning. The question is, are you willing to teach him? Are you willing to work together to fix what's broken? The auditorium remained silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the woman who'd recognized Cross first stood up. Martha Hendricks, the military spouse who'd weathered decades of service. Sergeant Major, she said, her voice steady. With respect, we've tried talking. We've tried being patient. The housing situation hasn't improved in 18 months. Families are living with black mold. Children are getting sick. We need more than good intentions. Cross nodded slowly. You're right. And that's not on Colonel Webb alone. That's a system failure. But here's what I know about system failures. They don't fix themselves with anger. They fix themselves with unity, with everyone in this room deciding they're going to solve problems instead of just shouting about them. A young private stood up near the back. He couldn't have been more than 22, his uniform still crisp with newness. How do we do that, Sergeant Major? How do we fix something when we don't have the power to fix it? Cross smiled slightly. You think I had power when I pulled those men out of Coast Province? I was just a sergeant major with a radio and a bad feeling, but I had something more important than power. I had people who trusted each other enough to walk into hell together. That's what this base needs to remember. You're not separate entities. You're a unit, and units survive by working together. Webb watched from the side of the stage, something shifting inside him. He'd spent so long focused on command structure, on discipline, on maintaining order. He'd forgotten the fundamental truth Cross was articulating. People don't follow rules. They follow people who give them reason to. Colonel Webb, Cross said, turning to face him directly, these people have legitimate grievances. Are you willing to hear them? Not as complaints, as intelligence from the field, as reconnaissance from the people living the reality you're trying to manage. Webb stepped forward slowly. His throat felt tight, his pride warring with something deeper, something that recognized truth when it heard it. Yes, he said finally, I'm willing to listen. Cross nodded and gestured to the crowd. Then let's start. But we do this organized, not shouting, one person at a time. You speak, the colonel listens, and we document every issue. Then we prioritize. Then we act. Sound fair? The crowd murmured agreement. It wasn't enthusiastic, but it was there. A foundation to build on. For the next 2 hours, Fort Harrison's auditorium transformed from a battleground into something resembling a council. People spoke. Webb listened. Cross moderated, his presence somehow making everyone calmer, more measured. The issues were serious. Housing problems, delayed benefits, equipment shortages, family support failures. Webb took notes himself, his hand cramping from writing. With each concern raised, he felt the weight of his failures pressing down, but also, strangely, a sense of direction he'd lacked before. When the last person finished speaking, Cross turned to Webb. Your turn, Colonel. What can you commit to today? Webb looked at his notes, at the faces watching him, at Cross standing beside him like a guardian who wouldn't let him fail, but also wouldn't let him hide. I can't fix everything immediately, Webb began. I won't insult you by pretending I can, but here's what I commit to. First, housing inspections start tomorrow. Every unit, full documentation, issues prioritized by severity. Second, I'm establishing a family advocacy council, real authority, direct line to my office. Third, equipment shortages get reviewed this week. I'll fight with headquarters if I have to, but you'll get what you need to do your job safely. He paused, then continued. And fourth, I'm establishing monthly town halls, not for me to talk at you, for you to talk to me. With Sergeant Major Cross's permission, I'd like him to moderate them, to keep me honest. Cross raised an eyebrow. I'm retired, Colonel. I came here today to visit an old friend's grave. Didn't plan on getting involved. Then stay uninvolved, Webb said quietly, or help me not become the kind of officer who forgets what service means. Your choice. The old man studied Webb for a long moment, then nodded slowly. 1 year. I'll give you 1 year. Then you're on your own. Relief flooded through Webb, though he wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe because having Cross there felt like having a safety net, or maybe because it felt like having a teacher who actually cared if you learned the lesson. The meeting ended not with applause, but with something better. People shaking hands, exchanging contact information, soldiers and families organizing themselves into working groups to address specific issues. It was messy, imperfect, but it was progress. As the auditorium emptied, Webb found himself alone on stage with Cross. The old man was gathering his jacket, preparing to leave, that limp making each movement careful. "Why did you stand up?" Webb asked suddenly. "You could have just watched me fail. Let me learn the hard way." Cross paused, his hand on the jacket. When he looked at Webb, there was something ancient and tired in his eyes. "Because I've watched too many good officers destroy themselves trying to be perfect," Cross said quietly. 27 years I saw it over and over. Smart, capable people who confused authority with leadership, who thought command meant control. Most of them either broke or became tyrants. A few learned. I stood up because I thought maybe you were one who could learn. "And if I wasn't?" Webb asked. Cross smiled sadly. "Then I would have walked back out that door and let you fall. Can't save everyone, Colonel. Learned that lesson written in blood and regret. But you can try to save the ones who want to be saved, the ones who are willing to admit they need saving." Webb felt something in his throat, thick and uncomfortable. "I don't know if I can do this, be the kind of leader they need." "None of us know if we can," Cross replied. "That's the terrifying part. Leadership isn't about certainty. It's about trying anyway, about failing, learning, and trying again. You'll make more mistakes, Colonel. Guarantee it." And started toward the stage steps, then paused. "One more thing. That grip I caught you with earlier, that wasn't to embarrass you. It was to show you something. You tried to move me with force. I stopped you not because I'm stronger, but because I was ready, centered, and knew what I was doing. Leadership works the same way. Force creates resistance. Centeredness creates influence." Housing area, watching a construction crew repair rotted window frames on Building 7. His uniform was dustier than regulation allowed, his boots muddy from walking the grounds. The old Webb would have sent a subordinate to oversee this. The new Webb, the one still learning, new presence mattered. "Looking good, Colonel?" Webb turned to find Sergeant Major Cross approaching, that familiar limp marking each step. Everything, his presence, had a strange effect on the base. People worked harder, complained less, held themselves to higher standards, not because Cross demanded it, but because something about him made you want to be better. "We're making progress," Webb said. "Slow, but steady. Housing repairs are 60% complete. The Family Advocacy Council just secured additional funding for the youth center, watching the construction crew work. And you? How are you making progress?" Webb smiled slightly. "Is that your way of asking if I've yelled at anyone lately?" "Have you?" "Once," Webb admitted. "Logistics officer missed a deadline. I started to lay into him, then remembered something you said, about anger being the easiest emotion and leadership being about choosing the harder ones. Bring for a sick subordinate and didn't want to make excuses. We fixed the problem together." "Good," Cross said simply. They walked in silence for a moment, observing the base returning to something resembling functional. The anger that had permeated everything 3 weeks ago had dissipated, replaced by something more productive. Not happiness, exactly, but purpose. In the auditorium, about the colonel who got 20 men killed. "That was you, wasn't it? You were the colonel." Cross stopped walking. His face remained neutral, but something flickered in those weathered eyes. "Smart man." "I looked up your service record," Webb continued. "You weren't just a sergeant major. You were a captain. Got busted down after an operation went bad in Desert Storm. 23 casualties. The next 20 years rebuilding your career from nothing." 16 years, Cross corrected quietly. "Took me 16 years to make sergeant major again. Longer than some people serve total." "Why didn't you just leave? Start over somewhere else?" Cross resumed walking, his gait slow and deliberate. "Because leaving would have been the easy thing, the coward's thing. Those 23 men didn't get to leave. Use what I learned from my mistakes to maybe save someone else from making them." Webb felt the weight of those words settle over him. Is that why you still limp? The injury from saving those Marines in the barracks fire? No, Cross said. The limp is from the operation that killed those 23 men. Took shrapnel in my hip, leg and spine. Refused medical discharge. Better. Some people need medals to remember their purpose. I needed scars. They reached the base memorial wall, where names of fallen soldiers stretched across black granite. Cross stopped in front of it, his hand reaching out to touch a section near the middle. Webb looked closer and saw 23 names clustered together, all with the same date. February 1991. I come here every month, Cross said softly. Hey, I get to tell them about a colonel who learned to listen before it was too late. They'd like that. They always appreciated officers who gave a damn about their people. Webb found himself unable to speak for a moment. Then quietly he asked, "Do you think they forgave you?" Cross was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice carried decades of pain carefully managed, but never quite healed. "I don't know. You carry when you command, Colonel. Every decision has weight. Every mistake has consequences. The good leaders learn to carry that weight without letting it crush them. The great ones learn to transform it into wisdom." "Which one are you?" Webb asked. Cross smiled sadly. "I'm just an old man who's made more mistakes than most and lived long enough to learn from some of them. Great leaders are rare. How they move through the world. They all had one thing in common." "What was that?" "They knew when to step aside," Cross said. "When to let others lead. When to admit they didn't have all the answers. That's what I saw in you 3 weeks ago, Colonel. Not weakness, the capacity for that kind of wisdom. That's rarer than you think." Himself, standing beside this scarred, limping old man who'd somehow saved his career, maybe his soul, in one afternoon. "I'm glad you stood up that day," Webb said quietly. "I'm glad you let me," Cross replied. They stood together in silence. Two men separated by age and rank, but connected by something more fundamental. The understanding that leadership wasn't about power or control or even success. It was about service, ability and grace. A young lieutenant approached, saluting both men. "Colonel Webb, sir. The Family Advocacy Council is ready for your meeting." Webb returned the salute, then turned to Cross. "You coming?" The old man shook his head. "This is your command now, son. You don't need me standing there. You never really did. You just needed someone to remind you of who you wanted to be. Home of pain and purpose." Webb watched him go, this unlikely savior who'd appeared exactly when needed and would disappear just as quietly. "Sergeant Major," Webb called out. Cross turned, waiting. "Thank you for not giving up on me, for seeing something worth saving." The old man smiled, genuine warmth breaking through years of careful control. "We're all worth saving, Colonel. Every single one of us. When you disappoint yourself, remember that everyone's fighting a battle you can't see. Lead with that in mind, and you'll do fine." Then he was gone, disappearing around a building corner, just another old veteran visiting a base he'd once called home. Colonel Marcus Webb stood alone by the memorial wall for another moment, then straightened his uniform and headed to his meeting. He had work to do, people to serve. One act of humility at a time. And somewhere on that base, an old sergeant major with a limp and scars that told stories of sacrifice walked slowly toward the gate, carrying the weight of 23 names and the satisfaction of knowing that today, at least, he'd helped prevent 23 more from being added to walls like this one. The base continued its work. The sun broke through the clouds,